All right. So we have a lot to cover. What I want to do is play catch up and get to um, intelligence, memory, cognitive psychology in general, even cover learning, motivation, sexuality somewhat, and um, uh, stage theories. So this is a ton of stuff. I'm gonna fly through these slides. If you have questions, go ahead and pause something and write it down and bring it into the live session. I'm gonna try to catch us up because we spent a little bit more time in some other areas. I don't regret it. I feel like that's very helpful, just because there's going to be a few of you for whom this knowledge is really powerful. So I want to speed through some of the fundamentals of human thought. I don't want to dig in too deep, so that we can move on to personality next week, and then move into kind of the questions of what goes wrong in a human life and what can we do about it. All right, so today I'm going to try to touch a lot of aspects of what it is to be a human, right? And what would we study if we're trying to study a human mind? Some of them are things like some people have high IQs. Some people have really a hard time learning. And we've learned that the power to learn new information is a ridiculously powerful thing. This is kind of the other superpower. This is Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. And grit basically means like perseverance. It's almost exactly conscientiousness in the big 5 personality traits that we'll talk about next week. But the 2 biggest powers that people can have would be number 2 is the ability to work super hard and make stuff happen, and you can learn how to do that. And then number 1 is IQ, just the ability to be intelligent, learn new information, read something and know what to accept and what to not accept. So intelligence is a superpower. Another thing that we wonder about is memory. Like how is it that we can have access to things or not have access to things? Because, if you don't have access to a memory, it's like it's dark to you. It's off the map. It's somewhere else. Freud's whole idea of the unconscious had to do with things that are a part of you, but you don't have access to them. And a little bit more scientifically, we have studied memory, and we'll go into that. Emotions, motivations, these are other things that are very hard to make sense of scientifically, and there have been many theories that have done so successfully. All right, let's go. So, remember, we had the psychoanalysts and the early psychologists. They were very ambitious. They tried to give a science of the human soul. They tried to show you everything that a human was. That's very ambitious. It's very difficult. The behaviorists stepped back and they said, I don't know what's going on inside of the brain. It's a mess in there. Have you ever cut one open? It's this weird wrinkly thing in there called the brain. I don't know what that thing's doing. It's this eye is controlled by this side of the brain. This hand is controlled by that side of the brain. It's a mess. We don't know what's going on. What we can observe is behavior, right? So the behaviorists cut off thinking. They cut off emotion. They said that's all subjective and fuzzy, and there's no way for us to really know what people are thinking and feeling, but we know what they do, and we know what they say, and we can measure these things scientifically. So the behaviorists made psychology very scientific, right? Okay, so only about a little bit before I was born, like in the 60s and the 70s, they started to look into cognitive psychology. Some of the giants in the field would be like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They came up with a book called Thinking Fast and Slow that explained cognitive biases. Those are amazing. Steven Pinker at Harvard unlocked a lot of the secrets of the mind. He's a giant. He's really amazing. Noam Chomsky, we'll talk about in a little while. He's maybe the most influential linguist of all times. But here we go. Okay, so these are some of the things that we're going to talk about. Sensory information shows up. We have emotions and memories that are associated with these things. We have thoughts about those, and those things work together on one another, and then our thoughts and emotions end up producing the behavior. So the behaviorists wanted to study behavior, but if you want to change behavior, you can't just do so with conditioning, and modeling is a little bit too simplistic. After a little while, you have to actually look at the thoughts and the feelings that people are having. And if you really want to change things, you got to work on that. Cognitive behavioral therapy is exactly an example of that. So what are thoughts made of? One of the things they're made up is concepts. In Abhidharma, you have Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnana, right? Vijnana is consciousness. Rupa is objects in the world. So objects in the world, we see them. We have a Vedana about them, whatever. And then we also have Sanya. What's Sanya? Sanya is a reducing concept. Like, I know that this is a phone. I know that this is a pen. I know that this is a guitar pick. I don't wonder about what this is. I don't think like, oh, it's like kind of a triangular shaped thing. I immediately make a decision about it and reduce it. Like you see this little picture of a turtle, you immediately recognize that as a turtle. You don't puzzle about the lines and think, well, what is it? You know, like your mind immediately groups things. We looked at the Gestalt theories last week. And those will show you that we immediately make concepts out of things. We immediately reduce things. And one of these is the prototype. And the prototype is like if you try to think about a perfect dog. Like, not perfect, but like if I say dog, the dog that should come to your mind if you're trying to communicate with the rest of the world would be like something like a golden retriever or a Labrador or something like that. It wouldn't be a really weird one. It wouldn't be like a poodle, because a poodle, yeah, it's kind of a dog, but it's a weird dog. A Pomeranian is a little tiny weird dog. When you think dog, you don't usually think Pomeranian. You usually think golden retriever, right? When you think of a vehicle, you usually will think of a car. That'll be a prototype, right? Prototype in tech usually means I've built this one to kind of represent the idea. This is what's going to come soon. This is my prototype of a jetpack or something, and it's like it represents what's going to come. There's pictures in some of these books where it'll be the prototype of a cat, and some cats just look like a normal cat, and then there's those hairless cats that are kind of scary looking, and you know the book is saying your prototype of a cat is probably not this hairless cat. It's probably the cat that looks cattish, you know. One of them is like for a cow. Normally people's prototype of a cow are those cows that have the white and black spots on there, and that's why in marketing, when you're selling a dairy product and you want to put a cow on something, you have a cow with the black and white spots on them because they just look like, oh, that's everybody's cow. That's, you know, and the one that they give in the book is like the prototype for a hero would be Gandhi. And that's a really good one, you know. Okay, so there are artificial concepts. These are sanya, right? There are artificial concepts and there are natural concepts. Natural concept would be something like snow. You have experience with snow, you know what it is. And then that's a natural concept, right? It's something real that exists in nature. And then an artificial concept would be something like a triangle or multiplication, or these are artificial ideas. They're ideas that are imposed upon the world, right? So you can have natural concepts, you can have artificial concepts. These are tools that we use in our brains to categorize the world and really to reduce the complexity of things. Everything in the world is just this crazy mix of stimuli. We talked about babies being born and seeing human faces and being like, I don't even know what a circle is yet. It's like just a crazy wash of sensation. Jacques Lacan, the great French psychoanalyst, called it the real. Morpheus says, welcome to the desert of the real, right? So what is the real? The real is raw sensation that's not been reduced. It's just this wash of color and all sorts of sounds and everything, but the sounds, we don't know what language is. It's just a bunch of screaming noise. We don't know what language is yet. We don't know what any of it means. There's a sound of a cat. We don't know what a cat is yet. If you don't know what these things are, it's just like this swirling, not even darkness, like this swirling mess of all kinds of sensation, and you don't know what to do until you use the symbolic. That's Lacan's term. And that's where you start to make sense of the chaos of sensation. And when you see a human face, you're not just like, oh, there's this circle here, circle-ish thing, and it's covered by, I don't even know what that, and here there's another one, and then there's this big thing in the middle, and then there's this hole in the middle, sound is coming out of that hole in the middle. What is that? You're just, that's a human face, whatever. Move on, and that's what sanya allows us to do. That's what concepts allow us to do, is reduce reality, move on to something better. And that's how humans have conquered the world, is because we think about things really quickly. Now, of course, you might have noticed that a prototype reduces all dogs to one dog, reduces all heroes to one hero. And you get that with stereotypes too, right? You see Americans, you think like, oh, all Americans are like Donald Trump, or like the stereotype of anybody. It's like, oh, I'm going to reduce this group to a single idea. And of course, that's foolish thinking. But you can see that in our concepts, this is where the birth of stereotypes is in our creating prototypes. All right, schemata are also very interesting. A schema is like a script that you follow. My daughter was having a bath. Grandma was giving her a bath, and I popped into the bathroom where they were doing a bath, and I was like tired from working, and I walked in there into the bathroom. I washed my hands, right, and I'm following the hand washing script, right? It's not like I make a bunch of decisions about, well, I'm gonna wash this finger, and now today I think I'll go over to this finger first. No, you just wash your hands. It's a reduced thing. I'm not going to use a lot of power on this. I'm just going to run the script, do the same thing I do every time. Brushing your teeth is pretty similar to that. I'm just brushing my teeth. You do it unconsciously, right? So I go in there, I'm brushing my teeth, I dry my hands, and when I walk out, the end of the washing my hands script is turning off the light. So my baby and her lovely grandmother are in there doing a bath. I come in there, wash my hands, all tired, and I walk out and shut the light off on them and leave, just because I'm following this script. And you could probably find yourself doing all kinds of things like this, where you'll be following a script that normally works, but you make like a stupid mistake, right? I normally put my keys on this table, but the table's not there. So you just open your hand, your keys just fall through the air onto the ground because that table has been moved. And you'll see what a robot you are sometimes, right? When you can pay attention to this. Like as soon as you get into an elevator, you will find yourself pulling out your phone in every elevator every single time. And what's the next step? It's probably opening Facebook, or Instagram or something. It's like, I want to scroll for 13 seconds, and then I'll go down and get into my car. This is something, breaking schemata is a way of breaking addiction. So sometimes people want to quit smoking, and what they don't realize is so much of their smoking is happening unconsciously. They're doing it without thinking. So like you roll into the area that, like in the engineering building, you have the area where, this is for the smokers. You have those staircases where everybody smokes. So as soon as you step out of class, you're walking towards there. You don't even realize you're walking towards there, but you're already walking towards there. As soon as you step out into that little area, you're already pulling your pack out, and then you're already pulling out the cigarette, putting it in your mouth, and then you have your lighter in your hand and you're lighting it, and then, and only when you're already blowing smoke out do you realize, I'm smoking, right? But some people want to quit, and I've quit smoking, 247 times. I've quit smoking very many times, and because I liked it too much. It was really cool. I liked doing it, but it's too bad for you, and I want to live, so I quit smoking. I suggest that you quit smoking too. One of the ways that they do it is they tell you to be conscious of your bad habit. Be conscious of the habit that you want to do. So when you're walking to go smoke, you're thinking, I'm walking to go smoke, right? Because a lot of times people will get to the point where they've already taken out the cigarette and they already put it in their mouth and they already have their lighter in their hand. Like many steps have taken place. And then by the time they see that fire, they're like, oh, I remember I wanted to quit. But so many unconscious actions have happened as a part of an automatic schema that's going on, that only by the time you're about to light the cigarette do you have the moment where your willpower can arrive and tell you, whoa, stop. Because you're not even thinking about it. It's so automatic. For a lot of times, in the past, a lot of people would smoke in their cars, which is kind of disgusting. Like you can smell a car that people smoke in. It smells terrible. It's just a really filthy, disgusting thing. And a lot of people smoke when they drive. So the moment they get into the car, as soon as your butt hits the seat, the next thing you're doing is popping a cigarette into your mouth and lighting up without thinking about it. And a lot of times when people will leave school, the first thing that they do when they leave school is just pop a cigarette into their mouth as soon as they walk outside. And it becomes such an automatic thing that people can't see it happening. And some people, I know I trust social media less than you guys do, but a lot of people, as soon as they will kind of get clear of whatever they're doing, the first thing that they'll do is open up their phone and start scrolling, like start passively accepting information from a screen, like that. And some people start to want to be conscious of their screen time and say, it's not like I want to never be on a Zuckerberg platform, but I want to do a startup company with my friends. I want to get healthy. I want to, my relationships are also really important to me. I don't feel very great right now, and I feel like, the 7.5 hours I spend scrolling every day is probably not good. So I want to reduce some of this time. People will try to challenge the schema, and that's like the automatic computer script that runs on your actions before you even know you're doing it. So like the way that they tell people to quit smoking is, take out the pack. I am taking out the pack, right? Take out the cigarette. I am taking out the cigarette, right? And then put it in your mouth. I'm putting it in my mouth. Like it's like mindfulness. It's like misatei, right? So when you are doing a schema, you mai misatei. But once you start to be mindful of things, even if it's like, I get too angry with my little brother and I'm mean to him, and then later I feel terrible because I'm mean to my little brother, and like he thinks that I'm so great and that I'm mean to him, and he's in lockdown. He's supposed to have friends and see his friends and everything, and he's sad too, and I'm just making him more sad because like I don't have patience with him. Man, this is nasty, So like a lot of times people can correct their anger by like the schema of yelling at your little brother. You challenge the schema of yelling at your little brother to where like your little brother starts to make you mad, and you're like, hey, and you're gonna go beat up your little brother, and then you realize, oh, I'm doing it again. I'm getting upset with my little brother. He's just doing normal stuff. Maybe I'm getting too upset with him. You're still angry. It doesn't change everything immediately, but you're doing it. And once you know you're doing it, it's the first step to changing it. Normally, these behaviors can change kind of on their own, but the first step is knowledge, right? Okay. So what is this stuff that we're doing when we make these noises with our mouth and spit these things out? Go ahead and take a picture of this if you're interested in it. It would make a good presentation. Linguistics is phenomenally amazing. I like these words here, like phoneme means the basic sound unit. Morphemes is the smallest unit of sound that conveys some kind of meaning. So a phoneme and a morpheme at the same time is as I, because I means something, and I is also a short little thing. You can also talk about like translation and transliteration. Like a translation is respecting the meaning of a word, and transliteration is respecting like the sound, the way that it sounds. A lexicon is a bunch of vocabulary basically, and then grammar is the way that the language goes together. You guys are second language speakers, most of you, so you know this a lot better than native speakers do. But we're going to talk about Chomsky in a minute here, and he talked about critical periods for language acquisition. Like earlier in the book, we met Jeannie. That case is just so sad. She was just like locked up and not allowed to learn language when she was a little kid, which is just absolutely horrible. And they were able to teach her a large lexicon of words later. She was able to learn what singular words meant, but she was never able to get grammar. So she had no language. She had a large vocabulary, but she was not able to get grammar, and she couldn't create sentences just because of like her deprivation from it. So the behaviorists were really challenged by language, and the reason was they thought that all learning happened from operant conditioning or classical conditioning. But language seems to be learned in a way that's completely different from this. It seems to be just soaked up by human beings, like we're wired for language, like we're made for language. And that's what Chomsky found out. He said, you don't really need to teach a kid language. Like when my kid is making grammar errors, I don't need to like correct my kid's grammar errors. She's just going to correct all that stuff herself. And one of the things that you find is like the children of English teachers and the children of truck drivers learn how to speak language to an extremely high degree, no matter whether they're trained or not by their parents and by the people around them. Kids don't need training to learn language. We do it automatically. If that was the case, if you needed like a good teacher in your family to teach you how to learn language, like, a lot of people wouldn't learn language because a lot of people don't have parents that like care for them, Reading and writing is a different story. It's a little bit less natural to us. So reading and writing need to be taught. But you don't need to be taught to speak and listen. I just throw as many languages at my kid as I can. I can speak Spanish. I'm not very good, but I can speak it. So I'm buying her books that she already knows. I'm buying the books in Spanish, and I'm going to read them to her in Spanish. And then even though I don't know what all the words mean, I can pronounce them correctly, and then she can learn another language. So she'll have 3, hopefully. You guys are awesome because you have 2 at least. But language acquisition is something that you get when you're super young, and when you're a young kid, you can learn so many languages at the same time. Okay. So they talk about the way that language moves on. This is interesting if you're interested in stage theories. I am more interested in this than you are because I have a young kid, so I'm not going to dwell on it, right? Problem solving. These are really interesting. They give you a couple of different versions of it, and I like these one right here. Like trial and error is something that we use more often than you think. There's something wrong with your computer. Maybe it's this, and then you try to figure it out. Nope. Okay, maybe it's this. You try to figure it out. Nope. Should we do a software update? All right, let's try that. Before you do a software update, you think like, should I turn it on and turn it back off? Turn it off and turn it back on again? Or like, should I close the program and then open it again? That solves a lot of the problems. But you're not working in a way that makes a lot of sense. Algorithms are step-by-step formulas for solving problems, and they will have steps, if then, and that's how computers will work. Heuristic is a general framework that's kind of a thinking shortcut that can help you sometimes. One of the ones that I use is called "Don't do the thing that everyone is doing while everyone is doing it." Don't do the thing that everyone is doing while everyone is doing it. If property values are going up and everybody is buying houses, it's not a good time to buy a house because you're going to buy high. You don't want to buy high. You want to buy low, sell high, right? If it's Saturday and everybody is going to the grocery store to do their grocery shopping, you don't want to go to the grocery store and do your shopping. If it's Friday at at 5 o'clock p.m. and it's raining and everybody's on the road, do you want to be on the road? No, you don't want to be on the road because everybody's on the road. So it's going to take you a long time to get home. That's kind of a heuristic that I use, is don't do what everybody is doing when everybody is doing it. But I'm weird. That's one of the ways this mind runs. So they give you some Sudoku puzzles. Those are cute. Can you do this one? Can you connect all 9 dots with 4 connecting straight lines without lifting your pencil? Pause it and try, right? I've tried this a few ways. Like, is it 1, 2, 3, 4? No, I'm missing that one. Right. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I'm missing that one. Like, you're always missing one. So how do you do it? And the text says, once you learn, you're not going to forget. Pause it. Try to do it. It's fun. I'm going to skip over the answer, and I'm not going to show you. Tick, tick. Maybe you saw it. You got to go in there and get it. So mental sets are ways that you can kind of get stuck thinking that you shouldn't be using this object in order to do this, right? Like the one that they talk about, how do you get the candle to be fixed to the wall without dripping? You're usually thinking that the box is useless, but the box is actually very useful in this situation. So if you jump out the thumbtacks and use the box, you can very easily solve the problem. All right, I'll show you. So thinking outside the box, this is like exactly the idea of thinking outside the box, where if you draw one like this, one all the way, you move outside of the box. Then you can draw a straight line that covers these 2 at the same time. And then you draw a straight line that gets 3 and then gets 3. And the problem is, normally your straight lines will get 3, 3, 3, and then you can only get one of these 2, right? So you're thinking, if I have a total of this many, I need to be able to get maximum per stroke, and there's 4 lines. I have to be able to get 9. I have to be able to get all 9 dots. It's just not possible. Well, it is if you think outside the box, and that's something that people say all the time. It's such a cliche, like it's so true that you just have to sometimes things that are cliches are actually very true, right? So anchoring bias, cognitive biases are not mental illnesses. They're like mental illnesses that everybody has. Yeah, write that one down. That's good. Cognitive biases are mental illnesses that everyone has. One of them would be the planning fallacy. I'm like, I can do 4 chapters worth of material in 1 lecture. Probably not. It's hard to do it's hard to do so much material at once, right? But normally you plan for something, like the planning fallacy. You think like, okay, it's going to take me 3 hours to write this paper between 9 and 12. You sit down at 9 o'clock, you're writing the paper, and then you're like, I need some coffee. You order some coffee, the coffee comes, you get up to get the coffee, sit back down, somebody interrupts you, you get back up, you sit back down, your phone is going ding, 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 you're returning messages, you don't write the paper within your 3 hours, and your plan is all ruined because you expected to be able to do things faster than you actually could. That's the planning fallacy, right? Now, that one's really famous. Another one is like the Dunning-Kruger effect, and that's where beginners think that they're going to be really awesome at things, when in real life, beginners are not really awesome at things. Then you move to being intermediately good at something, and you think that you're just garbage, you think you're terrible, and then later do you finally realize that you've been around for a little while, you've seen a lot of people, you are actually pretty smart, but you're never ever as confident as you are when you're a beginner, right? And this is something that you'll have in art a lot of times. Somebody will first find an art, they'll first learn how to do something, and they're like, oh my God, I'm just overwhelmed by the magic of this. I'm so awesome. Please look at me. I'm so great. But then after you move on in your skill a little bit, you hit a point where you're just realizing kind of like, oh, I'm starting to learn more about this. I'm starting to learn how difficult the skills are. I'm starting to like pay attention to masters and how good these masters are. I'll never be that good. Oh my God. And then you hit this like well of despair. So in the very beginning, you think your skill is very high. Really, it's very low. And then you move on to a point where you think your skill is very low, but actually your skill's pretty good, and that's a bad place to be in too. And then only when you finally, get to a high level with a skill, part of your high level is actually knowing how good you are at it. And by that point, you're much better than other people. But you're still not as confident as you are in the beginning. That's a Dunning-Kruger bias. Here's a few more. The anchoring bias is an important one to know. When my realtor took me around to find me an apartment, he took me to this one that I'm in right now first. And that was the one that he wanted me to get. That's the best one. He was a nice guy. And then he took me around to a bunch of other places. Those places were not great. They were all right, but I had this anchor in my mind. No, sorry, I'm thinking of something else. I had seen this one by myself before. The first one that he took me to was expensive. It was expensive and it was okay, right? But it was expensive. And then he took me around to a bunch of other ones that were cheaper, but they were not nice. They were just not nice, And then the last one, this is always important. The last one was really nice, and it was the same price as the first one, but it was much nicer. So it seemed like he had anchored us with an initial idea, because your first idea of like, here's an object, here's the cost, right? That first relationship is really strong, and we'll do kind of like some Bayesian updating to our initial credence, our initial idea, and be like, this really nice apartment, it's not amazing, but this nice apartment costs this much money. Okay, fine, acceptable. Let's move on. You go to this place, you go to that place, you go to this place, and they're all less good than that one. And then the last place is much better than the first place, but it costs the same amount, right? So in the mind of the realtor, what he wants is you to get the thing that costs maximum money, right? But finally, you in the end, he's showing you higher value. So like, if I had walked down through his path, I would have, at the end, been thinking, oh, this is great. I teach this stuff. I know what this stuff is. And when I talked to him, I told him, I'm like, hey man, I know about anchoring bias. I know about, like the end is always really important. I know about all that stuff, but I'm still really interested in that place that you showed me. And I kept asking him about it. Like, I'm thinking that's the one we want to do. We ended up getting a much better deal, still through him, because he's a great guy. But that's the way things will work out. Another version that I see people fall into this all the time is that like, you just make up a price, and then you cross that out in red, and then you put another price there, and you're like, oh, 33% savings from this other number. And the thing about the original price is a completely meaningless number. It's just a completely meaningless number. Like, if I ever sell anything, I'm going to determine a price. The price of the object is going to be 1,000 baht. And then I'm going to go above it, and I'm going to write 1,842. And that's going to be the fake price. And I'm going to cross that out. And then somebody's going to be like, oh my God, it's almost 50% off. From what? From a number I made up. But the anchoring bias is so strong that if I just put up that stupid fake number, I will sell more stuff. For sure, right? Okay, so that's anchoring bias. That's where you get a number relationship in your mind, and then it stays there like an anchor, right? And that's you can use that in business for sure. Confirmation bias means I don't like Donald Trump. I'm reading an article. The article sounds like it's saying good things about Donald Trump. I will just stop reading that article and find another one, because I'm looking for information that confirms what I already believe, right? If I believe that vaccines are very dangerous and they're making people sick, and I start reading an article, there are many articles out there right now that are trying to say, hey, you people that aren't getting vaccines, please get vaccines because we want to turn the world back on. Like, people are fired up about this. If I start reading that article, I'm going to be like, no, I don't want that. I want the thing that says vaccines are scary. Where's that? Google, vaccines are scary. And then you find it, and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, there it is. That's the truth. It's like, no, you just looked for stuff that confirmed your information, right? And we're all guilty of this. These cognitive biases are, they're mental illnesses that all humans have. All of us, right? Hindsight bias. And hindsight bias really hurts. Hindsight bias tells you that the thing that just happened was predictable and you should have seen it coming. And this is where regret comes from. It's the idea that, like, you get into this situation and then you make a mistake and then you end up in, like, kind of a bad place for a couple months. And then, like, after those couple months, or maybe even a year, you finally realize, man, I'm doing the wrong thing. This is dumb. And then you finally, like, get yourself out of the bad situation. Then you think, like, God, I should have seen that all along. I should have known. That is nasty, because, like, no, that's not the way that life works. Life makes a lot of sense when you look back on it and you're like, oh man, I just wish I could go back and tell myself, hey, make this decision sooner. Like, you wish you could do that. You can't. You just can't, right? We're only, like, as smart as we can be. Like, the other thing is watching other people making decisions. You're thinking, oh, it was obvious that was going to happen. Like, why did you make that mistake? This is hindsight bias, and it's now that you know how everything turned out, you think, oh, well, obviously that was obvious. But if you were in the situation, you realize it wasn't actually obvious. You didn't know if it was going to go this way or that way. You made a mistake, changman. Like, let it go. And that's really hard for people to do. We're really hard on ourselves, and it's because we have this hindsight bias. The hindsight bias just means that our minds, human minds, like all of us, make meaning in such a way that we think, like, you should have known that was going to happen. And it's like, I understand you feel that way, but there's no reason to think that, like, the human would have known that was going to happen, because we don't know the future until it happens, and then we expect that we should have known the future. So this is something that people will use to, like, ruminate and hurt themselves with. The idea, I should have known that was going to happen, and I should have done this thing otherwise, right? Okay. Representative bias. This is about stereotypes and the availability heuristic, tendency to make a decision based on example, information, or recent experience that is readily available to you, even though it may not be the best example to inform your decision. Another one is, like, survivorship bias, it's sometimes called. We forget that most businesses fail. And if you think, like, I'm going to do a tech startup company, like what? Oh, like Facebook. I'm going to be like Facebook, or Google, or like Twitter. I'm going to be like Tinder or OnlyFans. I'm going to be like Reddit. I'm going to be like, and then you just think of all of these examples of successful social media sites, and you're like, I'm going to make a social media site. Well, I mean, there is a giant graveyard of many, 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 many businesses that tried to do this and failed. Most businesses fail. Like, more than 50% of businesses in general, all businesses, fail. If you look at existing businesses, you are falling prey to survivorship bias, because you're looking at the ones that survived. The ones that didn't survive are in really bad shape. Like, kind of glorification of war takes this. A bunch of people go out to a war, and then the ones who come back, and they're like, I have stories of my courage and blah, 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 blah. And you forget about the people who didn't come back, of whom there are many, That's why it's called, like, survivorship bias, is because you're only getting the stories of the ones that survived. And the stories of businesses that have failed are not interesting. They're not broadcasted, and we don't get them, right? So that's kind of a mixture between these. So these are cognitive biases. If you're interested in this, read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. It's like the master of all cognitive biases. There are hundreds of these, and they're basically like you get some humans into the lab and you say, we're going to give you this test to test what you think, and then the humans try to pass the test, and they're all really bad at this test, and they get a huge effect size, and they find out, oh, humans just don't see reality very well. I think we talked before about Plato and how Plato was like, oh, well, the mind is the way to reason about reality because the senses lie. It's like not only do the senses lie, but the mind also lies. It's very easy for human minds to become attached to things that are not true. And cognitive biases, learning about cognitive biases is very important because it makes you understand how dumb we are. Seriously, how dumb we are. A lot of people who are learning from Kahneman and learning from cognitive psychologists in general, like they start to say, okay, fine, cognitive biases, we're dumb, I get it. How do we do what's right? Like, how do we do what's right with thinking? And Shane Parrish, who has the Knowledge Project, that's his podcast. Shane Parrish talks about mental models, and he learned this from Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger is perhaps the most successful investor of all times. And his ability to think about complex problems has made him ridiculously wealthy. He's the partner of Warren Buffett. Berkshire Hathaway is their firm. And they dig into this concept of mental models. Mental models are ways of overcoming cognitive biases. And one of the ones that I talk about is don't do what everybody's doing when everybody's doing it. That's just, it's like a little heuristic. But I talked before about Occam's razor in the philosophy of science class. And that's the idea that scientists think that the shortest distance between your idea, your explanation of why something is happening, and the truth, that's Occam's razor. It's a short, easy example. Why did the mouse, like we see mouse footprints, the cheese has been stolen, we heard squeaking noises. It was probably a mouse, like if you make something else up where the maid stole the mouse and the maid stole the cheese and she was making squeaking noises, so we would think it was a mouse or something. That's a circuitous route, right? Occam's razor would say no. And another one would be like conspiracy thinking, like flat earth people think that the earth is actually flat, and that like everybody who's involved in every single airline is trying to convince everyone that the earth is flat. Like every flight attendant and every captain, every pilot, every air traffic controller, they're all in on this, and maybe they get some round earth money. Like there's some like round earth conspiracy people who are like paying off every pilot. Like once you become a pilot, it's like, all right, Mr. Pilot, it's time for us to tell you something that you didn't ever know. The earth is actually flat, but you can never tell anybody, and we're gonna follow you around and make sure you don't ever tell anyone the earth is flat. And it's just, it's really complex. It requires a lot of moving parts. You'd have to have a lot of people in on it to make it happen. And it just seems like it's not true, right? That's Occam's razor. A lot of people think that 9/11 happened because a team went into the World Trade Center and put bombs in the World Trade Center to make it fall quickly. And if you look into it, like there's some compelling data that makes it seem like maybe that would happen. If you watch Building 7 fall, Building 7 just kind of goes and just falls. It looks like it was a controlled demolition, but and you don't ever see any footage of buildings falling. However, if you look at the way that the like what it would take in order to make that conspiracy true, it's really hard. It's really hard to like say that all of these moving parts would have come together. It's too complicated. And when things are too complicated, it's violating the principle of Occam's razor. And that's not to say that Occam's razor always works. It's a mental model that kind of saves us from some of these cognitive biases, because we're also pattern recognizers, pathologically so. Like, we'll recognize a pattern in anything. Sometimes we recognize a pattern that's not there. Often we will recognize a pattern that's not there. So these two mental models will help you with that. Another one is Hanlon's razor. And Hanlon's razor basically says, do not assume evil when negligence, incompetence, or stupidity, or even tiredness are a possibility, right? If somebody is not being nice to you, what do you think that is? Do you think it's because there's something going on in their life that's hurting them? Or do you think it's because that person hates you, right? We're set up to think it's because the person hates you. That's how we're emotionally set up. We're biased towards that idea. It must have been something that I did. No, it isn't. It's that person is upset because they're having problems in their life. And then they're taking their problems out on you in that moment, Or something really nasty just happened to you. Is it because a bunch of people made a plan to try to make your life bad? No, it's because some people made a mistakes and they're tired and they're not perfect. Hanlon's razor says it's not because they're evil, it's just because they're stupid, right? And that's a good mental model. If you use that model and you just assume, it's not because these people are mean or evil, it's just because they're stupid. They made a mistake, people make mistakes. And if you think like that, your life gets good. There's a bunch of mental models, and that would make a really good presentation of any kind, is people's mental models. They're like positive weapons against cognitive biases. This is a very interesting field. So let's talk about intelligence in general. How do you use mental models? How do you overcome cognitive biases? That's how you take control of your intelligence. But what about the intelligence that just kind of flows naturally? Well, there was this guy, Charles Spearman, and he believed in this factor called G. And G factor is like, you just have intelligence. It's like a slider bar that goes up or down, and basically like you have more or less intelligence. That's it, And there is tons of evidence that supports G, right? People don't like this idea. What we like is Howard Gardner, who came up with this idea of 8 intelligences. Well, some people are mathematically intelligent and some people are linguistically intelligent. And yes, there is evidence that supports this, but you can't factor out G. You can't factor out G. At some point, a very high level of linguistic intelligence gives you the power to abstract things. And that basically means, okay, I'm using language to try to represent this abstract concept. I can do that with mathematical thinking, right? And it's the same thing with math. If you get really, really, really precise with your mathematical computations, the logical power that gives you power in the linguistic realm. So often, all forms of intelligence rise together. And you can use your high level of intelligence in this area in order to make yourself more intelligent in another area. So like specialization, normally you would think, you have a PhD in anthropology. Yeah, maybe you know a lot about anthropology, but that doesn't generalize to other things. Actually, it does. If you go deep into learning something, it makes you smarter in every single way because it makes you better at acquiring knowledge. There are 2 kinds that we think about here, and that would be crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. Crystallized intelligence comes from knowing individual facts, but it also comes from seeing seeing iterations play out of something. Like if you have a lot of knowledge of how a game is played, it's because you've seen a lot of simulations of that game go. If you're really good at chess, it's because you've opened against people who are strong many times. You've seen this kind of attack come many times, and you have kind of like learned how to do that, right? Fluid intelligence is the ability to see complex relationships, solve problems, knowing how to do something. This is very, very important, but and that also comes from iteration. Like watching multiple iterations of something play out is really important, especially if you're like watching it mindfully and learning from it. Okay, so this is the triarchic theory of intelligence, is that you have analytical powers, you have practical powers or street smarts, and then you have creative intelligence, right? And you'd like to have all of these. You're probably stronger in one of them, and you probably enjoy one of them a little bit more. So, you know, people will say, well, you need to work on your weaker sides. And I think like right now, being 19 years old, you know, up through just the age that you're at, I think the better thing to do is if you feel like you're weak in one of these areas, just grab a friend who's strong in one of those areas and engage in some teamwork. Not only will that person make up for the things that you lack, but they will be your role model. Like if somebody is a very good analytical problem solver and you're not a good analytical problem solver, maybe you're really creative, and you get together and you do some teamwork with that person and you watch the way that they solve problems and you respect their intelligence, you will become more like them. They'll be like a role model, right? So I strongly stress teamwork. Try to find people who have the powers that you don't have but you want. Let them lead in that area and learn from them. This is Gardner. You can go ahead and take a picture of this. This is kind of cute. It is, but like it doesn't have a ton of predictive power scientifically, to be honest. It's just, it just makes people happy. And I mean, it's very true that some people are musical geniuses and they're not good at math and they don't have a lot of linguistic skill, but they're musical geniuses. You get that a lot. Same is true with athletes. Some people are like super athletes and they're like, well, I'm not good at academics because I'm a super athlete and that's what I'm into. But many of these multiple intelligences, it's very difficult to factor out this G, this like intelligent, this singular intelligence. You know, like you can kind of use it for anything. It's a general purpose problem solver. It's you know, AGI. We're trying to build AGI. Well, that's because the thing about human intelligence is that it can be applied to multiple problems, and human intelligence gets applied to all 8 of these. Emotional intelligence gets a lot of play. There's you know, articles that come out all the time why EQ is more important than IQ. And IQ is so important. It's so powerful. It helps you so much. If you're smart, you guys are all smart. You guys are all smart. Just thank your lucky stars that you're smart, because it's not good to be not smart. You're very lucky to be smart. That's a really wonderful thing that you have. Emotional intelligence is good. If you're real smart, you can learn how to have emotional intelligence. You really can, you know? You really can. And if you have a lot of emotional intelligence, you can get some smart friends, make a team with them, manage that team, and learn from their intelligence. So anything that you have, you can just use it to get everything else, for sure. Just build a little team, start a startup company during COVID. Go for it, man. Go for it. All right. So creativity often comes with divergent thinking and convergent thinking, and this is basically like divergent thinking is like thinking outside the box. Convergent thinking is like to follow the rules. So sometimes you break rules and sometimes you follow them. You kind of need both. You really need both, right? Creativity is kind of obvious. I'm not going to linger on this. So some measures of intelligence are controversial, but the IQ test right now is very powerful. It's very predictive. If you end up with a 170 IQ and you didn't cheat, like it's really measuring something, true about a person. They really do have a superpower. So people are like, oh, IQ isn't everything. Of course it isn't everything. And like I said, that trait number 2 is in Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, right? She did a TED Talk, a famous viral TED Talk about grit. So you can look up Angela Duckworth Grit TED Talk, and she is talking about how even if you don't have a screaming high IQ, if you work hard, nothing can stop you. Those are the 2 highest things. If you and of course you can have a very high IQ and ruin your life. It's not like an easy road to success, but it's like it predicts success pretty well. If you have a high IQ, if you're really smart, you really can use that to make amazing things happen. And if you have a high IQ and you work hard, nothing in the world can stop you, and you should be the next prime minister. All right, so let's keep going. Yeah. Alfred Binet was a French psychometrician who came up with this. There are other measures of intelligence. This is interesting. The Flynn effect, basically, we're seeing that each generation has a significantly higher IQ than the last generation. So we'll see what happens. It's very possible that Gen Z, Gen Alpha are going to be far smarter than the boomers, the Xers, the millennials. And I hope that happens, because the problems in the world are really difficult, and we need really smart people to make solutions to them. Okay, so this is the bell curve. IQ does represent very. It's very, very standardized. IQ is a 100 IQ is exactly average, and once you get up to above 150. It's extremely rare to have anybody above 150. So it's not like wealth distribution. Wealth distribution is not a normal distribution. Normal distribution means like this, like a bell curve. But people who have extremely high IQs are extremely rare. People who have extremely low IQs are extremely rare. Some gender differences are that women in general are more average. There are less women who have extremely low scores, and there are less women who have extremely high scores. And with men, there are more men who have extremely low scores. There are more men that have extremely high scores, and you see that in general in sex differences across many different domains. Is that men tend to be exceptionally good sometimes, and then exceptionally bad sometimes also. You can kind of see the truth in that, and that women tend to have a lot more stability. But you can argue with me if you like. So that's the IQ bell curve. It's extremely normal. It's extremely normal, right? This is the vast majority of people, and this is people with very high, very low. It's just a perfectly symmetrical, very very normal distribution. Yeah, 82% of the population are between 85 and 115. So that's anything up here, you're very weird. Anything down here, you're very weird. And none of you are down here, of course. So all of you are probably 100 and up, and maybe some of you are over here, and you guys need to work on saving the world. So the nature and the nurture perspective, I've heard that nature sets some parameters. You have some potential, and then nurture allows you to reach that potential. So most psychologists believe that it's a mix. So if you have genes that are going to set you up to be super intelligent, that's amazing. Here. Here's a fictional example of somebody who's got, like bad genes and a bad environment, but she ends up being like ridiculously smart. And that's really true, because you don't just have the intelligence that your parents have, you have the genes that your parents have, and those genes might combine in a very unexpected way, right? So genetics and IQ, when this information showed up, we started to see that like identical twin studies in general show us an extremely powerful correlation between having the same genetics as somebody else, which you can't really know what your genetics are, so you don't really know what your destiny is. But identical twin studies basically showed us that genetics are extremely powerful. We're not talking about emotion quite yet, but just to bring this in, I'm reading a book by Martin Seligman right now about happiness. And he says that there are 3 factors in happiness. There's genetics. Some people are just genetically made to be very, very happy. Like I know people like this, and they're just like, things can't really get them down. Like you can see their face frown, but like when you see people like kind of walk into a room, they're in a good place. They're just constantly putting themselves in a good place, and it's not because of anything. It's just because they're just people that know how to make themselves happy, and it's kind of natural. Some people are naturally active. Some people are naturally curious. A lot of this stuff comes from nature, right? And then there's circumstances. They don't say nature and nurture, they say circumstances. And the circumstances of your happiness would be like, are you in lockdown and learning online? Are you, hanging out with your friends a lot? Do you like to make music? Are you making music? Do you like to, use this skill? Are you using that skill? Those are circumstances. So it's genetics, circumstances, and then the final factor is stuff that's under your control. Stuff that's under your control, right? And the same is true, should be true for IQ as well. It's like, did your parents read to you enough when you were a kid? Well, you can't really control that. Those are circumstances. Do you have the kind of genetics that mix the right stuff in your brain in order to make you super smart? Well, I mean, with you guys, yes. Yes, you do, So you have that. You probably had this. A lot of this other stuff is under control. What are you doing with your tech? You have a screen in front of your face all the time. Is the person who's talking to you smarter than you or dumber than you? Are you looking at pictures of people who are doing things that are inspiring you to go up or down in terms of your intelligence? So this is under your control. You can use your tech to make you smarter. You can use your tech to make you dumber. You can do both things in the same day, right? Up to your priorities. This is there are a lot of specific learning disabilities like dyslexia. I know a lot of really successful people. This is my uncle, who's that expert in drugs. This is his shirt, and he had a real disability with reading and writing, but he became a PhD researcher. That's crazy. That's a huge problem to overcome. But his main superpower is that he's like a very inspiring person. All right, so that's intelligence. Let's move on to memory. Take a breath if you like. I'm not going to. So I'm hoping we talk about Elizabeth Loftus because she's really interesting. But no, that's in the crash course video. So if you want to watch the crash course videos about learning and memory, give me 1 second. All right. So my 2 favorite memory theorists are probably Nicholas Carr and Elizabeth Loftus, and we'll talk about both of them throughout the course of this right here. The computer metaphor makes a lot of sense in this case. Like learning something, making a memory involves encoding, storage, and retrieval, and you can have a mistake that happens at any level. If you don't learn something, if it never goes into the storage, it's a failure to encode. If you learn something but then you forget it, that's a failure to store the memory. And if you learn something, you do remember it, but you're not able to bring it out when you need it, that's a retrieval error. So that's kind of the way, these stages work. Encoding is the process of putting something into your brain. Like you could be driving a car and reading at the same time, That's basically, it's the process of getting information into your brain. It can happen in many different ways, and we'll talk about some techniques later. There's semantic, visual, and acoustic encoding, and they're a little bit different, right? Semantic encoding, you're trying to store meaning, and visual encoding, you're storing an image, and acoustic encoding means you're encoding the sound. So sometimes you're getting the sound of words, but you're not getting their meaning, and sometimes you're getting the meaning without getting the sound, and they're kind of stored in different ways. Oh, sorry, self-reference effect is if you make something about yourself, you definitely will remember it. And this is like a survival thing. So that's why I want you to write in the Google Classroom what you care about. Whatever you care about, write that down. You'll actually remember that. That's the important thing. And if you must remember something, you should make it about yourself. Okay. So this is the way that memory basically works. Is you have these three like upakon, they're like apps in your brain. You have the visuospatial sketchpad, and that's how you remember a map of a place. You remember a picture of something. You're like, do you remember where this person was standing when you were there? And you're like, oh yeah, I guess she was on the left. And that's because you have a picture in your head. It's like a sketchpad in your head. The episodic buffer is kind of a way that you set up time in your memory, because it's not like a program that's going to run a tape or run a digital file like an MP4 from front to back. We don't encode that way. So we encode in time in a way that we don't really even understand yet. Now the phonological loop is interesting, because the phonological loop is basically like, how you have that little voice recording software, the little voice recording app on your phone, and you can record hours of stuff. Well, the brain has one of those too, but it's only like 7 seconds long, and that's we can see the truth of this in art, like in music. That's why a hook is short. Like that little, like all the music from this century always has all these tiny little annoying melodies, like in that we ain't never getting older. It's like the simplest, most annoying melody in the world. Like the soy, how about? And you will remember that forever, because it imprints onto the phonological loop. It's a 7-second loop that you can put into the mind, and that will directly store a memory so well. That's why earworms, like an earworm, is the idea that you have a melody in your head and it just won't stop. It's like that melody it's playing on the phonological loop, and it's hard for us to get that melody off of there. The same thing will happen is if I say, hey, remember this phone number, 867-5309, 867, and you'll be like, 867. 867. You'll be looping it in your mind so that you can hold on to it. And then if I'm trying to tell you other things and you're still trying to remember the phone number, you can you're using some other app in your brain to listen to me, but then you're using that thing to constantly rehearse the number. What's the number? Do you remember it? How many of you remember it? What if I start throwing other numbers at you? That's going to mess you up. 7, 2, 47, 472, 472.3, 343 times 4, 3 times 3, 7 times 8. Do you still remember the number? Were you rehearsing it? Were you keeping it on a loop? It's 8675309. The way I remember it is because there's a silly song back in the day that goes 8675309, and we would joke and say nine all the time. So there you go. The central executive is an interesting concept, and it's been very hard to pin down for a while. It's here, and I've been reading papers recently where they're trying to talk about how the interactions between these different places in the brain will actually make you make decisions. And they're starting to figure out this very, very confusing process called executive function, decision making, right? Okay. So you have the sensory input, it goes into sensory memory. If the memory is not transferred, it is lost. And then it goes into short-term memory, and it must be rehearsed in short-term memory. If it is not rehearsed properly, it is lost. And then if it is rehearsed properly, it ends up in long-term memory. If it's in long-term memory, we don't really have people don't like run out of storage in their long-term memory. We have very impressive long-term memories, and people are able to pack their long-term memories full of all kinds of things. So if you learn how to learn, you can get stuff into your long-term memory, and you can keep it for long periods of time. You can retrieve it when you need it. You can make the brain very powerful. Nicholas Carr talks about in The Shallows, and this book is old now, it's more than 10 years old now, I think, about how notifications mess with this process. Like multitasking and notifications in general. If you have these ding, bang, ding, bang, bing, 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 break, 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 things coming up all the time, and you're trying to learn, it's very difficult to learn because you're in the process of maybe moving between sensory memory and short-term memory. Or maybe you're in the process of moving from short-term memory to long-term memory. You're reading something, you're deep in something, and then you have this ding, 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 and you're reading text messages on the screen while you're doing it. Don't do that. Just don't do it. I mean, if you're gonna do that, just read the text message and don't even try to waste time on whatever you're learning, because you're not gonna be learning it. Like, it just doesn't, the human mind just won't work that way. You can be like, oh, I'm Gen Z, yo. I came up with these upakorn. I've been listening to ding, 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 and studying all the time. It's like you don't even know what your mind could be if you turned all that stuff off. And sometimes you have to single task. And this is something that like Silicon Valley people will do all the time. They'll be like, I'm only returning messages between the hours of 10 and 12. And then from 12 to 5, I'm going to work on some creative stuff. And then at 5, I'm going to turn on my social media again. Like they will always be unplugging from this. The social media people, they have kids. They will not let their kids touch that stuff because they know that this stuff is not, it's not good. It's just not good for humans. It's made them rich, but it's not good for us, right? So if you learn how to learn by turning all your stuff off, single tasking, it also creates a lot of happiness. All right. So sensory memory is basically like something that you're holding for a moment. It has to be constantly rehearsed or it gets dropped. The Stroop effect is interesting. Like if you're reading a word where the color and the meaning and the color where they contradict, it takes you longer to read it. It takes you longer to read it because it's the wrong. What they normally do is they'll show you red with the color red, orange with the color orange, but it takes you longer to read the words if they're inappropriately colored, right? So this is short-term memory. We just talked about it basically, and this is long-term memory. There's implicit, non-declarative, and explicit. These are things that like you know about this and you don't know about this. Like there are things that are going in that you don't know about. And the more you learn about this kind of stuff, the more you can use it to your advantage. I talked a little bit about state-dependent memory. If you're going to take a test, like a big standardized test, you want to get a really high IELTS score so that you can get into a school in Switzerland next year or something. And you know that you're going to be taking the test in a month, and you're going to be taking that test at 8 in the morning. You're not usually working at 8 in the morning. So what you do for the month is you wake up at 7, you eat some food, and then you sit down at 8 o'clock, you take a timed practice test, like many times a week in order to prepare for this, because you know that you're going to be doing it in the morning. You're not normally a morning person. You want to train your memory to be able to retrieve the necessary information and perform well at that time. And if you train the mind to be performing well at that time, it will perform well at that time. The same is true is if you have it booked in the afternoon. You're normally tired and you get this like kind of nappy sensation at 2 o'clock. Well, at 2 o'clock, you got to be ready to go because you're going to be taking a test then. So, put your meals where you want to put your meals, put your study sessions where you want to put your study sessions. But when you take your practice test, you take it at the time you're normally going to be doing it. You're leveraging the power of state-dependent memory. Another thing you can do is make your memory about you. Like the memory you want to encode, you make it about you, And psychology is pretty easy to do that. You just think about how you want to apply it and then write your notes about how you want to apply it. Another thing that you can use is a memory palace. And I would invite you to do a final presentation about that. But there are ways that people will say you can take the spatial map you have of the house that you grew up in, and you can the interview I heard about this, the woman was a memory champion, and she had committed to memory all of the countries in the world, but she wanted to add additional information. So she wanted to do it in order. And the order was from most country with most population down to the country with the least population. And the way that she did it was she thought of the house that she grew up in. And she was like, okay, the doorknob is going to be China. And then the little latch that makes the door, open or shut, that little latch is going to be India. And then I think next is Indonesia. And then that's going to be the little metal piece that it goes into. And then the little button that pops in is going to be, what's number 4? Maybe the U.S. Maybe the U.S. is number 4. I don't know. I can't really remember. I'm probably missing a really big important one because I don't do the memory palace. But she was able to recite in order of population. She didn't memorize the populations because those are changing. But there's no reason you couldn't. But she was able to create a spatial map in her mind and encode a list of things that she wanted to remember. And, that's really powerful. I think after a little while, she could be like, what's number 56? And then she'd be able to do it. So yeah, explicit memory is very easy to say. We consciously remember that. I remember that, 2 presidents ago was Barack Obama. Semantic memory it's in words, it's in concepts. You can express it, and then episodic memory is like episode, right? It's like a story. You remember things like a story, and it's very strange how constructed these things are. They're more like fiction, more like literature than they are true things. Implicit memory is memories that are not part of our consciousness. And part of these are the schemas that we will rehearse. Like my hand washing schema where I turned off the light. Procedural memory is that you remember how to do things, right? You remember how to tie your shoes, how to ride a bike, stuff like that. Right? You remember how a song goes. Retrieval is the ability to bring something back, and they test it in different ways. Recall is the way that you pull something out of thin air, and then recognition is like a multiple choice test where you're like, well, I mean, if you tell me some examples, I could be like, oh, it's that one, but I can't pull it out of thin air. Recall is like a fill in the blank, and then recognition is like multiple choice, and relearning is of course important. I would need to relearn Spanish because we'll talk about this in a little while, but I used to know Spanish very well, but I've learned Thai, and it has eaten my Spanish. The cortex is where the executive function is. The amygdala, the fear button, is actually very important in learning. The hippocampus, we know, is very important in learning. And the cerebellum is important for learning coordinated muscular actions, such as like a TikTok dance or like learning how to throw something. It's where you coordinate many different muscles together. That's stored in the cerebellum. It means like little brain. The amygdala and the hippocampus we covered when we talked about the limbic system. Yeah, the cerebellum and the prefrontal cortex, these are important. there are many neurotransmitters that are implicated in learning. Dopamine is one of them because dopamine gives you that feeling, I'm awesome, right? If you look at the Stanford habit psychologist B.J. Fogg, he has a program called Tiny Habits, and one of the things that he has people do just to like hack the brain is once you do a habit that you want to do, like let's say I want to study for 20 minutes as soon as I wake up in the morning. I want to study French for 20 minutes every time when I wake up in the morning. So you wake up in the morning, you study French for 20 minutes, you get done with that, you shut your book, and then you go, I'm awesome. He has this way of like cheering for yourself for a moment and just being like, yeah, I did a good job. And seriously, if you do that, if you celebrate, it reinforces you. It makes you feel the feeling of dopamine. And if you do that, it makes more powerful memories. So when you get done with your study sessions, you should be like, bam, I'm awesome. Yeah. Pretty funny, right? Arousal theory is about optimal performance. So like if you're, I got to relate this to music. If you're gonna play a show and there's a bunch of people there and you're nervous, that's good because that nervous energy can translate to good things. If you're gonna play a show and you're terrified and you're really feeling insecure and you're really feeling bad, that nervousness is gonna destroy you. It's really bad. It's too much. And then at the same time, if you're sitting in your house and you're going to play music for nobody, you don't have that pressure, so you're not going to be amazing because there's no pressure forcing you to be amazing. One of the good things about school is that you have the pressure of grades and it forces you to learn. It pushes you into a state of, I'm afraid of failing. So since I'm afraid of failing, I'm going to be pushed to go further. I don't like, it would be awesome if everybody was just learning for their own, for their own sake. But I know when I did a master's degree, I did 2 in a row, and I worked so hard at those, and I would have never learned like that for my own, happiness. I would have never written like that for my own happiness. I was like being forced to do it, and it made me smarter. And now I can read anything and I can write anything, and that's, as much as that seems silly, those two things can be superpowers. If you can read and understand anything, like that's awesome. It's really an amazing power. I can read a page of something and be like, true or not true, or I don't know, but the I don't know category shrinks. All right. So that's arousal theory. It's the idea that like, strong emotions trigger the formation of strong memories, and weaker emotions feel that. That's very true. If you're in a very fired up state when you make a memory, it's easier to retrieve information then, and that's where practice tests come in. If you take a practice test but you don't like force yourself to follow the time, then you are not really getting the benefits of the practice test, because part of what it should be doing is stressing you out, to be honest. Flashbulb memories are memories that everybody remembers, they're usually tragedies, so I won't go into those. Amnesia, retrograde amnesia means you don't remember the past. Anterograde amnesia means you remember the past just fine, but beyond a certain point you don't make new memories. Much fiction has been written about this. People recover from it sometimes. Memory construction, this is really, if you watch the Crash Course video, the section about Elizabeth Loftus is really amazing because she shows that we actually do construct and reconstruct memories. They're not true things that we're playing back. The other thing that you'll find is that like when you're stressed out by a situation, you are even less likely to identify somebody who has attacked you, and that's really not what we want. That's really not what we want. We want stress to sharpen the ability to capture a memory. That's what we thought for a long time, but like Elizabeth Loftus did a bunch of this research and found out that like when a human is stressed out, memory capture is worse, much worse. I remember this because I was at Mahidol and I went into a sauna, and I'm sitting in a sauna. It's a bunch of naked people sweating together, and this guy was in there being like creepy. And I'm a tourist in this. Like normally men don't experience sexual harassment, but this guy was being creepy. From a distance, he didn't like come into like my personal space, but he was being real creepy from a distance, and I was like, I was real upset at the violation of the social norms, and I'm like, man, that's just not cool, and I left, and it didn't stress me out a lot, but then there's people coming in and out of the bathroom, and I realized for a little while, I'm like, I didn't memorize that guy's face. He just kind of looks like everybody to me. So there's some creep walking around this gym, and I don't actually know who it is. Like, I didn't encode that information because I was just so like, it's not like I was really stressed out about it either. It's just like I was stressed out enough by it to be like, you're gross, man. That's not cool. So that's one thing to be mindful of, is that we are not good at remembering information about stressful situations. So that's something that's wise to prepare for. One of her famous experiments was like, if you use different language, you can reconstruct the memory for somebody. Pay attention to this right here. If she says, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? How fast were the cars going when they collided with each other? How fast were the cars going when they bumped into each other? How fast were the cars going when they hit each other? And then the lowest number, how fast were the cars going when they contacted each other, right? And you can change the language of things in order to make it seem like the crash was big. Even the word crash is a accident, crash, traffic, fender bender or something. You can use different kinds of words, but when they use the word smash, then they would say they were more likely to report that there was broken glass on the ground, even though there was no broken glass on the ground. So this is just, she did a really good job of making people study how bad we are at making memories and how much we just make stuff up. Repressed and recovered memories, she was also instrumental in this. There were a lot of people for a while, they would be like trying to, there was a lot of therapists for a while, they're like, you have a problem, it's because there was some abuse that happened in your life that you don't remember. And all these kids would accuse their parents of abuse, and then they found out, oh no, actually people like constructed a bunch of emotions, and a bunch of families got ripped apart by this tendency of people to make stuff up, because we are not good at remembering things. We are just not good at remembering things. These are a few different kinds of errors that we can make in our memory, and the worst of it is post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is where memory that is not helpful, not useful, and not wanted is constantly arising into consciousness at times that you don't want it. Okay, and Freud had a theory of, and this is the Ebbinghaus effect. You forget so much so fast, but then after like a month, the forgetting goes way down. So after the last week of this class, you'll have term break, and like a month into term break, you will have, by the time the new term starts, you will have forgotten everything you're going to you will have forgotten everything you're going to forget, and then everything that you have when you begin the new term, you should have for life. You should have for life. The decay is much slower at that point, right? We talked about some of these biases. They're important to study, and this persistence is a nasty situation. I have friends who have been in war and been scarred by it, but it's definitely not just war. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a horrible situation where people have bad memories that whatever happened at the moment that it happened was way too much to process, and it wasn't processed in a way that that the person can deal with, and it kind of just is an overwhelmingly powerful memory. It's much more powerful than it should be, because the meaning that it represents is not, it's not useful to the person that keeps having it, and people really, really, really want this to go away. And like I said before, if you know somebody who needs help with this, if you look into Rick Doblin's maps, his studies with MDMA, they did really, really inspiring work. They took people who had treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder, to the point where like they had tried treatment many, many times and they couldn't be helped. But the combination of this MDMA and psychotherapy together with a male and a female therapist working together, I don't know if that's significant or not, but they found that it prevented abuse by the therapist, which is horrible, right? But they were able to get a lot of people, like more than half of the people were cured, and of the people that were cured, most of the people that were not cured had a clinically significant reduction in symptoms. So this is a really, really nasty mental illness that people have, and within the past couple of years, they've come up with this breakthrough treatment. I haven't heard what happened. This is in about 2018, so hopefully that's something that's possible for people here. Okay. So interference, right? This is where an old information, like your old phone number, you're remembering your old phone number, but you're trying to remember your new phone number. This happens in language too, proactive and retroactive. And one of them is where you learn a new language and your knowledge of an old language interferes with your ability to learn the new language. You might find this if you try to learn German or something. Another thing that you get is you learn a new language and it makes you forget the old information. It makes you forget the old language. I got the same thing. All right. So ways to enhance memory is you can use rehearsal. That one's good. Conscious repetition. Chunking, elaborative rehearsal, and that's where you think of more interesting ways to do it. Mnemonic devices are important. Those are really fun. If you want to learn vocabulary, I suggest the Magoosh vocabulary app for like IELTS. It's so good because like you can learn vocabulary when you get into the elevator and you just would be checking social media. If you open the Magoosh app instead and do that, you will learn a lot more. One thing that this book doesn't cover that I love is kind of, here, does it? No, it doesn't give you time-based things. Like if you study in multiple sessions and you take a lot of breaks, it helps you encode the memory. If you study in like a big cram session the day before a test, that's not the way that we encode memory. What you should do is set up like a study habit that you're doing it all the time, and take some breaks, like use that Pomodoro thing. 25 minutes, 5 minutes off. 25 minutes, 5 minutes off. Do something else, come back to it. Do something else, come back to it. Really strengthens these memories. So if you're being challenged by one of your classes and you're really working to encode memory, that's the best thing that you can do is try to work with that subject for short periods of time, multiple days. And that's maybe the best application for students that you can get from this is work with the material, multiple times per week for short periods of time. It's the very best way that you can learn things. Make it about yourself. All right. So unfortunately, and these are you can take a picture of this. Yeah. Moving is good. Sleeping is good, right? And turn off your pings and poongs and bing, bing, bing. Make it about yourself, right? They don't say break it up, and they need to say break it up. It's important to break it up. All right. So next time it looks like we're going to talk about Patanagan, and we'll get also to personality. But I think what we're going to do with personality is hopefully eventually I'm going to catch up with the rest of the course, but I don't want to go extra long. So next week, we'll get into lifespan, emotion, and hopefully we'll also be able to touch personality. All right. Have a beautiful day.